Laceration is finally done. It took me one entire year to get the Dunmer Dragonknight of my dreams in Elder Scrolls Online, update 2.0.8. This is the final build, meant for high-end PvE content. Also, you can take this into PvP. This is magic-based fire damage vampire Dunmer, exactly what it was meant to play. I'm using double destruction staff for this setup, and in this video I'm going to show you gear, skills, and how to use them, as well as some combinations of abilities and gear if you can't afford the top end stuff. Stay tuned if you want to see the final results, level 1 to VR 14. Here's what I came up with: Laceration. Alright gang, before we get talking about the build, I want to talk to you about racials, what I picked, and going into vampirism, and a couple things as far as my setup goes. So this, I used a Dunmer Dragonknight. I really recommend Dunmer Dragonknight after your year playing this game. I can seriously tell you there's no better combo to go with Dunmer Dragonknight. So I'm rocking Inferno Nugget. Don't worry too much about the attribute points. You can change it however you want to see fit. You should really be around 20,000 health in PvE. That way you don't get one shot by mobs. You want to pump up your magic as much as you can to get spell damage and magic very high. I'm actually pretty low on spell damage because I trade off high spell damage with this set right here. Decent magic, but it's really for the extra fire damage that I'm going for with this setup. So that's something else we'll get into. I have low magic recovery as well because I put so many champion points into reduced cost that it hardly costs anything. So I get my magicka back by using ultimates as a Dragon Knight with passes. Talk about that later. So spell critical 52% with my little orb floating around, not bad. I am stage 4 vampire. For PvE, you probably want to feed once in a while to lower this if you're going to do like Veteran City of Ash. The reason I use vampire is the extra 10% magic regeneration, and also in PvP I love it. So that's why I go vampire. I use the Atronach Mundus Stone for increased magic recovery, though if you don't have magic problems, you probably want to change this out to the mage to increase your overall maximum magic. And then also I use bi-stat food primarily to pump up my numbers here: max health, max magic. So if you're going to start this build out from scratch, roll a Dunmer. Seriously, roll a Dunmer. Some other good ones are High Elf. Imperial, not so much. Why? Imperial has no bonus to max magicka and doesn't hit any harder. Dunmer is the only race right now that has increases to max magicka and stamina. That's why it's one of my favorite races. And fire resistance, extra fire damage. So, my advice, take a Dunmer. If you're not going to take a Dunmer, take a High Elf. Don't take a stamina-based race class. You will be disappointed after you spent 500 hours doing a magicka build to only have passes that affect you racially. Why am I talking about Dunmer? Look at this. Increase max magicka and stamina by 6%. Flame resist and increase magic, that's 9%. And then spell damage with fire effects. Guess what we're doing? All fire damage. So, last point of advice. Go Dunmer. Now let's talk about the skills. In past videos, I've talked about the skills on this guy, so I'm not going to go over it too in depth. But what I am going to go in depth after explaining these is show you combat live, still images, and go over how I'm using it. So top to bottom, there's two things every build should have for DPS. One is your spell critical buff, which I get this from Sea of Flames, the Dragonknight ability, and Ardent Flame. You can also get it from the Mages Guild. I like this personally better now because it restores some magic. It gives me a dot proccing my Valken Scoria. Also, I use the Structured Entropy buff for my spell damage, 20% after I cast it. So that also increases my max health, putting me at that 20,000 mark. So I love Structured Entropy. So that's the two things you need to have up at all times. Sea of Flame is a toggled on ability. That's easy. Structured Entropy, 14 seconds. Keep this thing active. Trust me. The two dots you're going to want to apply here is Burning Embers and then also Engulfing Flame. So it's just a basic big huge dot. 3 dots actually. Structured Entropy, 4 with Sea of Flames, Burning Embers here. We also have Standard of Might on my front bar now because it does a lot more damage with Molten Web. Molten Web. is your single target, up close and personal, massive damage. This thing can crit for 11k, but you have to be up close to use it. So if you're not going to be up close and you want to play a more ranged kind of ability, go to Destruction Staff and use Force Pulse. So I like the Molten Whip because it hits harder and it looks cool as crap. That's my primary bar. And so my back bar is more utility and AoE. I have Extended Chains to pull people. That's from the Ardent Flame Tree. I have Eruption, which is a nice dot, and it's a good snare. I have my Fire Ring, which is my basic press it over and over and over if there's a bunch of mobs. That does a dot. And then I have Scolding Rune. This is the secret to the build. This thing added so much DPS, making me hit that 18k mark. Because it does damage up front, it does a huge dot, and it lasts for a long time. Plus Shooting Star. This is a good AoE one because you get back ultimate for each enemy you hit. So the more ultimates you have, the more resources you have. Why is that? Dragonnight's Battle Roar. Activating ultimate restores tons of magicka, stamina, and health. That's how we survive these long battles and not casting over and over and over. But if you do have a fight that's going to last quite a while, I would take Equilibrium and either put it in Scalding Rune's place or Eruption or something like that. Also, you're going to swap out some abilities if you're fighting Undead and Daedra in the Fighters Guild with Evil Hunter. So these two abilities, whichever one you like or don't like, Scalding Rune or Eruption, think about swapping. But you really want the other things to stay the same. Okay, so that's the basics of this. Important passives that you must have. Basically everything in Ardent Flame. That's common sense. Draconic Power is not too much. Earth and Heart is utterly amazing and important to get Battle Roar. Battle Roar, Battle Roar, Battle Roar. And then also Mountain's Blessing. Each time you activate this, it's going to pump up the party's damage, weapon damage, and it's going to grant you ultimate. So every time you're in combat, cast Eruption, you're going to get a trickle of ultimate. Gotta have that. Your Mage's Guild abilities, you really need to pump up. So longer, reduced cost. The most important is using this. Casting gives you that empowering, making your next attack do 20% more damage. You're going to want to pump up all the racials, obviously, all the light armor that you can get. And that's basically, I mean, the gist of it. The Destruction Staff, anything you can get in here. Not too complex. Double Destruction Staff is what I'm running. Okay, so to show you some of these abilities, what I'm going to do instead of just going to beating on little derpy mods is I'm going to actually do a slow show of doing the DPS and Spindle Clutch and explain to you exactly what I'm doing and how I use it. So I hope you guys like this. Let me know if this is better for you to grasp the build and how to use it. Alright, as I start the Spindle Clutch boss, I'm going to close the distance with my what I call AoE dots. I'm using a couple of abilities, Eruption and Scalding Rune. These two are going to proc a long-lasting damage over time effect and get this guy burning. After I do that, I'm going to swap my bars, drop my ultimate Standard of Might, and then go into my single target rotation. So I'm going to start with Entropy for more spell damage, then Engulfing Flames for more fire damage, and then a long burning damage over time effect with Burning Embers. After all those dots are applied, I have some time to start spamming Lava Whip. I'm using Lava Whip for my high single target damage on a boss until the dots are gone. This is my #1 priority, looking at the top, looking at my bar. So I can see about 4 dots. Structured Entropy, the blue one, a couple red ones, which are my single target damage, and then Scalding Rune. All I'm doing is looking here and at my bottom bar to see what buffs fall on or off. As they fall on or off, I switch bars and just keep on applying them. So here, I got my 2 buffs are up. Entropy's about up. I'm going to recast it shortly. Eruption's getting a little bit low, so I cast Entropy. You see it right there. Then I go back, bar swap, and then do my Entropy, Eruption, Scalding Rune, and now the other buffs have fallen off. I go back, Engulfing Flame, then Burning Embers. I'm constantly just monitoring my buffs. If I don't have any buffs up, or debuffs that need to be applied, I just go into Lava Whip spamming. Also, I'm Lava Whip spamming, but I'm using a little heavy attack in between, called Animation Canceling. Okay, once that's done, I pull so much damage, the boss gets on me here. And a little question, what's missing? Notice, if you look at my buff bar on the bottom, you notice 2 things are missing. My AoE buffs. That's all you have to do is constantly monitor this. Even though the boss is about dead, I probably should just recast him and get in the habit of doing it. and that's the 18k single target damage fight. Doesn't seem too chaotic when I'm talking about it right here, but in the moment it really is. So some things to improve on is basically constantly keep up your damage over time effects. You have a couple with AoE, 3 or 4 with your single target rotation, and this is where all the damage comes from. So realistically, you're just looking at your buffs and debuffs, light weaving or heavy weaving in between the attacks, using a little bit holding your mouse button for a heavy attack to proc that more damage. You enchant your weapon with an enchant for even more fire damage, and that's how you do so much damage with this build. Let's talk about gear and the setup I'm using for this build. It's hard to get, expensive, but definitely worth it. I'm using a 5-piece Sun, Silks of the Sunset. You obtain this from Hellross Citadel. You can also buy it on Guild Traders. It comes in the neck, chest, legs, boots, belts, gloves. That's really what the pieces that you want. It increases flame damage. This is very, very beneficial, though you could go with martial knowledge or even a crafted set like the Magnus. Anything that buffs your spell damage. Falcon Scoria, there is no substitute. City of Ash, this is endgame primal DPS. You get the head from the City of Ash boss, Scoria, and then the shoulder from a random drop on the gold key. Cyrodiil's Light. You can get this from PvP, or you can buy it from traders. The only substitute maybe is Cyrodiil's Cyrban's rings and or healer rings, something that adds magic or spell power, but this is the best in the slot. Torg's Pack is a really good spell damage that can be craftable, but honestly you can use Magnus or anything else that uses spell damage, max magic. That's really the alternatives that you can use, but if you're looking for the best in slot, these are what you need to use. This next chart here that I'm going to show you is all about which items I have in which slots. So if you wanted to replicate this exact build, come back and look at this chart. The weapons that I'm using are also a Master Staff that I probably would use if I had Sharpened, but I don't, and a Nirnhoned Torg's Pack Staff, because you get to choose the enchantment on a non-Master Staff. So you get to choose the trait. Nirnhoned seems like it's more damage than Sharpen, so I really, really like that. Though some people are using double daggers. Lastly, I use a lot of consumables. Keep your 1 hour food buff at all times and suck those potions down. Anytime my magic drops below 20% or 80%, I hit that potion button. Potions do no good in your inventory, and this is my simple but yet effective gear setup. Last thing I wanted to talk about with this build is champion points. The good thing about grinding a character all the way to VR14 is you get a lot of champion points. I'm up to 189. I realize that not everyone's going to have all that champion points, but let me talk to you in general terms of what's effective for this. Now, this isn't an all-around build. If I'm in a PvP or something, I probably will do my champion points a little differently. Going into the green, this is kind of our resource management tools. Now, I do have 30 points into Magicka Regeneration. The reason being, the Arcanist here increases magic recovery by 10.8%. Reason I go here first is the Synergizer. Now, even as a DPS, I constantly use synergies. The key to maintaining your resources in this build is dropping ultimates. Having a 250 ultimate cost with the Earth and Heart passive is actually super beneficial because we go almost to full magic, full health, full stamina. So if I'm constantly using synergies, I'm going to get a flood of ultimate. Combine that with using Eruption for the Earth and Heart passives, I'm always getting a lot of ultimate. Why is ultimate important? More ultimate, more dropping one, Earth and Heart, boom, flood of resources. So I realize not everyone's going to go this route, but it's something that I found useful. Then I dump all my points into Magician, reducing the cost of magic spells. This is an enormous, enormous benefit, and I really recommend using it. So the other things you could do, especially if you're doing PvP, but I mean, this is really built just for major, major damage. And so that's exactly what I do. You also could use Tenacity here if you wanted to do heavy attacks in between your normal damage rotation. But really, as far as resource management goes, that's what I found most beneficial. In terms of damage going, I go heavy into Elemental Expert. Increases your flame damage. Most builds that are using magic go here. Thermidurge, because it's damage by magic. But most, if not all of my damage is really coming from this. So I like that. I do also like Elfborn because it increases the damage, how hard you hit your spell criticals do. Basically an extra Shadow Mundus Tome and some spell penetration along with my Nirnhone and the passives within the tree. Throw on an elemental basically debuffing them by 40%, and you have a lot of spell penetration. You also could put some points into here in the staff excerpts because they do light weave a lot, medium weave, so you could get a little more damage here. But honestly, pump the crap out of this. Like I said, this is not balanced, but this is a good damn damage tool. Going back to here, I'm a vampire, so what do? I put a lot of points into here. Now, you can only mitigate about 20% of the flame damage, and you get a lot of mitigation through the Dunmer passive. I still like to pump this up. I don't know where the diminishing return lines mark, so I just go massive points into here. But like I said, this is not balanced, and I probably would respec this if I was doing something else, especially maybe into Hardy for magic resist, poison, and then damage over time effects. The stuff over here is not that advantageous for us. Spell Shield is, but if you're wearing Nirnhone, you don't have to worry about it a whole lot. PvP, you know, we would change this Sword and Board. Going over here, increasing the effectiveness of healing received is really good. And potions, blah, 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 blah. Just do an ass load of damage. Everything else will figure itself out. And that is the build. VR1, or actually level 1 to VR14. This has been an absolute fantastic ride. You guys have seen the whole progress and what actually goes into this build. I looked at my first video and it's been about 2 months. This is now my favorite character in the game, my favorite build, maybe of all time, and it's so powerful. So the reason I do this stuff is because of you guys. Your feedback, you watching this, it motivates me. You have no idea. Because I've been the guy that's been working, taking care of family, going to school, and I didn't have the time to research all this stuff. And I relied on people like me to figure it out. So let me do that. Also, if you have tips to share with the community, please leave them in the comments. We can all learn from each other, and I want to get better because no one's perfect out there. There's always room for improving. Also, let me know if you liked the damage/teaching tool I did with the DPS instead of just fighting random NPCs. Thank you so much for watching. Laceration finally complete. On to the other classes, specifically Templar next. Subscribe, leave me a comment, and I got a whole bunch of videos to come.